Today we're going to explain the evidence behind why Bakugo, specifically an adult version of the character, was the second user of One For All, and why this theory makes perfect sense. I posted this theory on Twitter the other day, and it literally blew up, with 90% of the replies telling me how it exploded their minds in several different directions. And it was also pretty cool to have some big YouTubers like Truth Hero chiming in with their opinions, even though he was wrong. Sorry bro. The core of this theory actually hinges on understanding 4 characters other than Bakugo. So let's start with them so you'll understand the context. And this is super important, so even if you think you know these characters, just believe me, you need to listen the whole way. So to start with, we have the brother of All For One, a guy with a righteous heart who supposedly had no quirk. This character was nothing like his older brother, so much so that All For One tried to make him submit by forcefully giving his little brother a stock power piling quirk. This would of course then go on to become the power known as One For All. And for those of you that don't know, One For All was created due to the stock power piling quirk combining with the brother's secret quirk that no one knew about. This secret power allowed the brother to transfer quirks to other people, but only if they ate his DNA, and whilst they were doing that, he had to simultaneously want his quirk to be transferred. Now moving on. The next character you need to know about is Shigaraki, and at this point I'm going to go into some big spoiler territory for the manga, so if you really don't want to know any spoilers, then this is the end of the video for you, my friend. Currently in the manga, Shigaraki is undergoing an operation from Dr. Ujiko that will give him an immense power of some kind, and the doctor says on this page that once the operation is complete, everything will be within Shigaraki's grasp, including One For All. Remember, up until this point, One For All could never be taken by force, as it can only be transferred when the person holding it wants it to be passed on. And from this wording in the manga, it's pretty obvious that Shigaraki will somehow have a means of taking One For All by force in the near future. The third character we need to be aware of is Shigaraki's grandmother, Nana Shimura. She was the 7th holder of One For All, and during her hero days, she mentioned that the feelings of previous One For All users can be recorded inside One For All. Essentially what that means is that the spirits of One For All users live on inside the quirk, and that future users can see the memories of previous users. This has been demonstrated in the manga when Deku saw the memories of the first user of One For All and then interacted with him. And finally, the last character that we need to understand is Eri, a character who's been introduced in Season 4. Eri is a 6-year-old girl who has a powerful quirk called Rewind, and I actually did a video breaking this quirk down in more detail, but here's just a high-level overview. Eri can manipulate time on an individual scale, meaning she can rewind living things back into a previous state. So for example, if she touched you, she could probably rewind you back into a baby, or rewind you so far that you never even existed. Now it's important to remember that not only is Eri just 6 years old, but she has never once in her life trained her quirk. Consequently, whilst we've only seen her apply this rewind quirk on an individual scale, it's not a stretch to say that with practice and focus, she could be able to rewind on a much bigger scale. If Deku can achieve such rapid growth on his first day of meeting Gran Torino, could you imagine if Eri, a 6-year-old child, had a few years to train her quirk and apply it in different ways? It's just something to think about. But with all that explained, let's get into the main crux of this theory of how Bakugo is the second user of One For All. So, to start with, during a certain arc in the manga, Deku essentially went inside the core of One For All and was able to see the spirits of its previous users. Now when we zoom in at the end here, we see 2 characters who've been intentionally blurred out by Horikoshi, one of whom will immediately catch your attention. I mean, it's not even just the hair, look at the gauntlets on his arm. This clearly looks like a silhouette of a more grown up version of Bakugo. And let's be real, if I showed you this silhouette in a totally different context and asked you which character you think this is, come on, there's no way you're not saying Bakugo. Horikoshi is a writer who has meaning behind every panel he writes. The fact that he's intentionally blurring out this silhouette should tell you something. He wouldn't make one of them so obviously look like Bakugo if there wasn't some kind of meaning behind it. But I know what you're thinking. How could this be Bakugo, given that Deku was in fact looking at the previous users of One For All? Well, my friends, the answer essentially boils down to this man, All For One's brother. Imagine this. Like him, you possessed a quirk that allowed you to transfer quirks, but you could only ever use this power if someone eats your DNA, like a strand of hair, and you simultaneously have to will them to have your quirk. Being completely rational, There is no scenario in which you ever just happen to discover that, not even by accident. In the world of My Hero Academia, there are no manuals, there is no book that tells you how to use your own individual power, and on that basis, the notion that All For One's brother just happened to discover that he could transfer quirks if he wanted it to be passed on while someone was eating his DNA is quite frankly impossible. Even the master of quirks himself, All For One, believed that his brother was quirkless. That's partly the reason why he gave his brother the stockpiling power in the first place. No one knew this guy had a transfer quirk, and the nature of the quirk meant that no one would ever discover it at random either. But the main point is this. The only way the brother could have found out is if someone told him it was there. Nana Shimura was told by her predecessor, she then told All Might, and All Might told Deku. And can we all remember how shocked Deku's face was when he heard that he had to eat a piece of All Might's DNA? It's just not something that people would naturally think to do. So with all that on the table, how did the first user of One For All find out that he could transfer quirks? There is not a single person alive in his time, not even his older brother, who was aware of this power and could have told him. The answer has been staring us in the face. Bakugo, one of only a handful of people to ever know of One For All, was sent back in time by an older version of Eri who had mastered her rewind quirk to show the first user that he could transfer quirks, thus becoming the second user himself and completing the fixed time loop. And he doesn't change the past by doing this either, because he always was the second user. And before we properly dive into this, let me just briefly explain the theoretical concept of a fixed time loop. This is a concept in physics that is quite similar to a self-fulfilling prophecy. In a time loop like this, a sequence of events is triggered by one specific event. But that specific event that caused everything to happen was actually the result of someone time traveling back and causing that event. But this is where it gets really trippy, because the person who went back in time to cause that event and, set everything in motion, only did so because that event had already occurred in their time. That's what we're dealing with here. Bakugo lived in a world where One For All had always existed, but was then sent back in time to tell the first user how to use it, but he was only able to do this because One For All had always existed, and therefore he had the knowledge necessary to go back and tell the first user. But anyway, with the time travel explanation out of the way, I'm going to explain to you how everything ties in together. We established earlier that Shigaraki is getting a power-up in the manga that will allow him to somehow take One For All. On the basis that Horikoshi is not a writer who just puts stuff like that in there for no reason and just to troll you, Shigaraki will at some point in the future take One For All from Deku. With the power of One For All, coupled with his already powerful decay quirk, and the full army of the Paranormal Liberation Front, he will destroy Hero Society. And for the record, if you don't know what the Paranormal Liberation Front is, then you should probably watch my video breaking down the My Villain Academia arc. Anyway, after Shigaraki takes One For All, he fulfills his dream of destroying society. After this, there'll likely be a time skip, and this is something that Horikoshi has actually hinted at recently in an interview he did for the new My Hero Academia movie. After a sufficient time skip, I believe that Eri would be able to focus her quirk in a way that would allow her to rewind people back in time, if only for a couple hours or a few days. And we spoke about this earlier, but this is a logical application of her rewind quirk. Rather than rewinding the individual, she can now rewind the time directly around an individual, thus sending them into the past. But moving on. Given that Shigaraki has One For All, he's able to talk to the vestiges within One For All, one of them being his grandmother, Nana Shimura. While all hope might seem lost for the heroes, Bakugo, Deku, and Nana Shimura have a grand plan that transcends time itself. Remember, because Bakugo is the second user of One For All, Nana Shimura, as the seventh user, has already seen his memories from before he travelled back in time. Therefore, she knows the sequence of events that occurred in order for him to go back in time. And because she has this knowledge, she sets the events into motion by telling Shigaraki that Bakugo is the true creator of One For All, and that as long as Bakugo is alive, the heroes have hope. This would cause Shigaraki to go on a hunt for Bakugo, who is now older due to the time skip. Now, with Shigaraki looking for Bakugo, the heroes will naturally catch word of this, and through the grapevine, they'll find out that Shigaraki believes that Bakugo is the true creator of One For All. This sequence of events will send the heroes on a massive arc to find the last remnants of the quirk-enhancing drug, Trigger. Now, Trigger was a big part of the My Hero Academia Vigilante spin-off, but it's also become a big part of the manga as well. In the Overhaul arc, we see numerous characters using Trigger, with the most notable probably being Mimic. To put it bluntly, Trigger makes any character overpowered. Now when the heroes eventually find this, they'll give the drug to Eri, which will supercharge her quirk beyond comprehension and allow her to send Bakugo back in time over 100 years so that he can complete the causal time loop by telling the first user of One For All how to transfer the quirk. Bakugo essentially sacrifices himself, as he's taking a one-way ticket back in time with no hope of return. This would be an amazing moment for his character and would show insane development. Bakugo has never been the type of character to make the sacrifice. But this sacrifice, by going back in time, it would ensure a few things that I haven't even mentioned yet. So firstly, he'll meet the first user of One For All and tell him that he has the ability to transfer his quirks. Then he'll receive the power from that user and become the second holder of One For All. Bakugo will then help cultivate the power through the years. But what I hadn't mentioned is this. In the manga, it's revealed that Deku is the first and only user of One For All who is able to access the quirks of the previous users. So by Bakugo going back in time, he's essentially allowing Deku in the future to access his explosion quirk. Horikoshi has made it abundantly clear that Deku has been studying Bakugo ever since they were kids, and for those of you that have seen the anime, you'll know that Deku's actually copied a few of his moves already. If anyone could use the explosion quirk as good as Bakugo, it's Deku. And the reason Deku is able to have One For All after Shigaraki taking it is because Eri has rewound his body back into a time when he had it. And this is by no means a stretch, as we saw during the Overhaul arc that Eri rewound Deku's body to allow him to use 100% of One For All, and that was when she had zero training with her quirk. Additionally, by Bakugo going back in time, his spirit will be able to appear as a vestige inside One For All in the future. And sort of like having Thor's hammer, I believe that if Shigaraki possessed the One For All quirk, he wouldn't actually be able to use it to its full potential. The reason I say that is that One For All was created and cultivated to defeat All For One. So because Shigaraki is All Might's apprentice, there's no way he's going to have access to all the cool features of the quirk. For example, accessing previous quirks or seeing all the memories of its previous users. Now, about this grand plan with Nana Shimura and Deku and Bakugo. The sequence of events that we've seen so far would lead to the final battle of My Hero Academia. Because Bakugo was the second user, he is now a vestige within the quirk, and Bakugo's plan is to lead both Deku and Shigaraki to a specific location where they can duke it out. Remember, at this point Shigaraki has destroyed superhuman society, and he has an entire army to command. He's essentially a king, and a king never goes anywhere alone. But the vestige of Bakugo will somehow trick Shigaraki into going to a location where Deku will also be. And crucially, Shigaraki will have to be alone. This would at least give Deku a fighting chance of defeating Shigaraki and returning society back to the way it used to be. Unlike Tomura, Deku has access to all the quirks within One For All. Could you imagine this fight? One For All user with access to all the quirks against Shigaraki, who has access to both One For All and the Decay quirk. It would just be the best final battle that you could possibly imagine. And regardless of how the fight between Deku and Shigaraki turns out, the fact remains is that it was all set into motion by Bakugo and Nana Shimura, with Bakugo being the secret hero, and because Bakugo went back in time, he had the benefit of not only giving Deku explosion, but ensuring the timeline remained intact and that One For All was created. And with that, we've come to the end of this theory. As you can see, it draws a lot on the story points that Horikoshi has introduced, for example the drug Trigger and the spirits of One For All, and obviously Bakugo looking like a previous user of One For All. But with that said, let's get into some Twitter questions. So the first question we have is from Tana, who says that it would leave a huge time paradox, since if the first user of One For All never knew how the quirk worked, it would never get to the point where Bakugo himself could learn how the quirk works. And I totally see where you're coming from, but the nature of the question is kind of flawed. And the reason I say that is because you're thinking about time in a linear fashion. As human beings, we constantly think of time as one straight line that keeps moving forward. but the concept of a causal time loop is different from this perception. In this causal loop, the timeline has always been based around Bakugo going back and telling the first user. There never was a timeline in which Bakugo wasn't the second user, so the premise of this question is flawed. Moving on, the next question asks why Nana Shimura would help Shigaraki, and I think what they mean is why would Nana Shimura tell Shigaraki that Bakugo was a threat? And the answer to this is that Nana Shimura has seen Bakugo's memories. She's seen what's motivated him to make different decisions in his life, and one of the things that motivated him to travel back in time was that the heroes heard through the grapevine that Shigaraki was looking for Bakugo because he believes that Bakugo was somehow the creator of One for All. And this is when things begin to click for the heroes, as Deku, having previously seen the vestige that looks like Bakugo, goes on one of his famous rants and convinces everyone that this is the best course of action to take. Now this next question is quite interesting. What if Bakugo intentionally modeled himself, his look and his hairstyle and everything else, after the second user of One for All? And I have a pretty simple answer to that question. If Bakugo had modeled his costume after a previous hero from God knows how long ago, in the exact same way that we know that Kirishima models himself after the hero known as Crimson Riot, and we know that Deku models himself after All Might, you'd think that Bakugo would at least once reference the famous hero who inspired his costume and look. It's a bit weird for Bakugo to model himself after someone that no one knows or no one has ever mentioned. And by that same token, that's the same reason why I doubt it's a family member as well. Bakugo's personality is such that he wouldn't be able to keep something like that to himself. Like, come on guys, this is Bakugo's personality. If he was proud enough of a previous family member or a previous hero to model his look after them, you can bet your ass he's going to talk about it. But yeah, we all know that he idolizes All Might. He's never mentioned another hero or a family member or anything like that that has inspired him more than All Might. Now these next comments were more of a statement than a question, but I figured I should address them. So the first one says that there's nothing up until now that implies that Eri can send people back in time. To which I say, of course there is. The fact we've seen her apply time travel on people's individual bodies is pretty indicative of the fact that with actual experience, rewinding the space surrounding a person is not that far, like it's not a big stretch. The fundamental nature of Eri's quirk is to rewind. That's why it's called rewind. Just because she has only rewound people's bodies so far, it's simply showing us what an untrained application of her power can do. Now, this one is quite similar, and it states that Eri's quirk is just said to work on living beings. Again, let's just take a step back here. Characters within the world of My Hero Academia, they base their decisions purely based on what they see. The only reason anyone would ever say Eri's quirk is limited to living beings is because that's all they've ever seen so far. And the reason they've only seen that is because she's a 6-year-old child who has never trained her quirk. Let's imagine it's a week from now, and Eri manages to rewind an apple. Suddenly, those same characters who said that she could only manipulate living things would go, oh wait, no, she could manipulate inanimate objects as well. It's purely based on what they've seen so far. And the fundamental nature of rewinding things means that her quirk could be used in the future in this way. And because Eri's quirk is still in its infancy, placing limitations on it doesn't really make much sense at all. So I can't wait to see where it goes from here. But regardless of that, whatever you thought about this theory or this video, please be sure to do two things. First, let me know in the comments if you think that Bakugo is the vestige that Deku saw in his vision. I think the fact that Horikoshi has intentionally hidden this character and the design is so similar to Bakugo's silhouette, I know Horikoshi has done this for a reason, and whilst my theory might not be the exact theory, there is definitely something to do with Bakugo in here, for sure. Either that or Horikoshi is just a massive troll. And secondly, don't forget to subscribe, as I know this video is going to take a long time to edit, so I would really appreciate your support as it's a lot of work to make these videos and put them out. Thanks for watching guys, peace out.